We have Sandhu again for the second day, first session of the second day. And I welcome Dr. Arun Kumar, IQAC coordinator, and Dr. S.N. Jha from RRCAT Indore. Then Professor Dipti Gangwar is also with us, who is the head of department in chemistry. Other colleagues from my college, who are also the participants, and all other participants who are very important to all of us. We will be starting our day with the second, first session of the second day, which will be, this talk will be delivered by our distinguished speaker, Dr. S.N. Jha, from Raja Ramanna Center for Advanced Technology, Indore, and he will be talking on use of EXAFS or basic principles and PES using synchrotron. So thank you once again, and now I invite Dr. Jha to start his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. So I'll just start sharing. Yeah. Is the screen is visible now?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes.
So I want to do first full screen. Let me see. Yes, now it is full screen. Okay, so slight change in the topic. I had included earlier that PS also, but now we have just focused because slightly I have covered PS, and I knew that Dr. Ramjane also must have covered, right, on the photoelectron spectroscopy. So today I have tried to focus on only the EXAFS part. Let us see how it goes with time. So I left yesterday on the application of synchrotron radiation science and the various applications based on the scattering, absorption, and imaging techniques. And thereupon, I was describing also on the techniques which are based on spectroscopic methods, and in which I covered the hard X-ray based technique among the only X-ray fluorescence. The X-ray absorption was left yesterday, I kept for today. And I covered other low energy spectroscopic techniques. So today I'll now come to straightway the X-ray absorption technique, that is EXAFS. And this is how I have planned. I'll introduce the subject and then give you brief perspective, historical perspectives, then the physics behind EXAFS, chains, then methods of performing EXAFS experiment, then the beamlines facility, and some examples. So basically, the extended X-ray absorption fine structure, the EXAFS, it is a spectroscopic technique basically, but we determine the atomic arrangement. So it looks slightly, strange, like spectroscopy means normally you deal with energy levels and all. So, but we finally get information of the structure by using the X-ray absorption technique. And the small features in this X-ray absorption spectrum, historically the name it was given as a fine structure because it was a very tiny signal among the major absorption spectrum. And in fact, historically, initially, first it was ignored as a noise in the signal. So, but later on, when, of course, I just go through about the history now. Later on, the first time it was given a value that it is some, not a noise, it is a signal, and that was observed by Kossel in 1920. And it was known at that time as a Kossel structure, which we call now part of it as a Jane's absorption near structure. And after 10 years, in 1930, the Kronig gave some explanation for this fine structure, and also that time it was known as Croning structure. And this modulation of this X-ray absorption coefficient in the material was explained on the basis of the long range order, like in X-ray diffraction, and 2 papers he published in that. But later, after 4 years, in 1934, the EXAFS was also observed in molecules. And then people were confused. When long range order you explain, then how it explains the EXAFS in the molecules. And that gave some clue that it may be short range order kind of mechanism which gives this fine oscillations. And so Kronig proposed the short range order theory, but in that he didn't include the de Broglie factor or mean free path or phase shift, etc., which is now the part of the modern day EXAFS theory. So that time EXAFS was known as Kronig structure, but Kronig never appreciated all himself. He himself was not satisfied that how SRA for molecule as well as for a solid, it can be explained. And then till 40 years, this confusion was there. And in 1970, you can say there was a rediscovery of EXAFS technique. And this happened because of this, this bunch of 3 people, that is Sayers, Stern, and Lytle. Stern was a experimentalist. He has some facility in his lab to record the X-ray absorption spectra, and Lytle was a theoretician. And Sayers joined this group as a PhD student in Washington University, and his job was to demonstrate the EXAFS oscillations by theory and match to the experimental spectra. And so this group finally gave a theory, and he showed that the Fourier transform of the EXAFS oscillations gives a pattern close to the radial atomic density distribution. It is not truly the radial distribution function, but it is close to radial atomic density distribution. And finally, along with this theory, by the time 1970, synchrotron source also came up. First generation source started, and this also gave a boost to the EXAFS technique, and how that's how EXAFS evolved, although it was known starting from 1920, but finally in 1970 it started in full-fledged manner. And this is the historical paper of this group, that Sayers, Stern, and Lytle, and who published a paper in PRL. And the title was New Technique for Investigating the Non-Crystalline Structures, the Fourier Analysis of the Extended X-ray Absorption Fine Structure. And that's what he, in his abstract, he says, we have applied the Fourier analysis to our point scattering theory of X-ray absorption fine structure to invert experimental data formally into radial structure function with determinable structural parameters of distances from the absorbing atom, the number of atoms, and the widths of the coordination cell. So technique is illustrated with a comparison of evaporated and crystalline GE. So this is the first spectra on the germanium, which was explained by this group. So now EXAFS modern theory is ideally suited to map the, there is advancement in the theory beyond the Sayers by Rare group and other people. So it is now ideally suited to map the local structure, which is sensitive to local distortions in the structure. It results from interference of the outgoing and backscattered photoelectron wave. The range of photoelectron is limited due to the core hole lifetime and the inelastic scattering. So this is the outcome of the modern theory. So we'll further now elaborate this part. So for basic understanding the physics behind the EXAFS, let us start with the basics of the X-ray interaction with the matter. And this is, for example, you see the plot of the cross-section, absorption cross-section versus photo energy in the range of 1 to 100 keV. And then you can see there are 3 major phenomena here the Compton, Thomson, and the upper one is photoelectric absorption. So basically in this energy region, we have predominantly the photoelectric absorption cross section, and the in between the, I mean, as you energy increasing, there is a monotonic decrease in the absorption cross section, which is directly inversely proportional, that means to energy. And in between, we find there is some discontinuity, and like here L3, L2, L1, and this is for K of germanium, and this is due to basically the absorption edges, it is called, and it is classified with the capital letters K, L, M, or like that, based on the core level ground state of n is equal to 1, 2, 3. And this edge energy is a characteristic of each atom or any monatomic gas, and therefore this I mean technique is very element specific, because if you can tune with a particular absorption edge, we can see the surroundings of this particular atom. So however, in so you can see there is a monotonic just decrease in the absorption spectrum. But however, in the real material, like in the solid or any condensed matter, the spectrum always shows some oscillations. For example, if you zoom out this part, germanium Ks, so it shows a oscillations beyond this absorption edge. For example, this is germanium Ks, and beyond this Ks there is a oscillation, and this is known as in general as a X-HAPS, or and extended word has come because this extends beyond the absorption edge of this particular element. Now this oscillations, the reason is behind this is because the real material, the absorber is surrounded by several neighboring atoms, and thus you imagine the photoelectron now coming out of the atom as a de Broglie wave, because electron has a dual properties. So if you imagine as a de Broglie wave of the outgoing photoelectron, so this wave now propagates from the absorbing atom, and then if it sees some neighboring atom around absorbing atom, then it may get backscattered because of the electron cloud or density of the absorbing atom. You can actually, and so this outgoing and the backscattered waves, then because of they both have some phase property, and they can interfere. They can do interference, quantum mechanical interference, and this interference can give either destructive or constructive interference, and that's why you see peak and valley in this X-HAPS oscillations. And this analogy you can imagine, for example, let us say if you imagine a pond, and in that water pond, and then if you throw a stone, okay, in the center, and then you see as soon as you throw the stone, the water waves propagate outwardly, and it propagates until it sees the bank of the pond, and from there it gets backscattered. And then this backscatter and outgoing waves, water waves, you might have seen that it then gives an oscillations, either peak and valley. So similar thing is happening here. This is a pond of electron cloud, basically, of different density, and the starting point is the absorber. So basically the source of the wave is the absorber, and the detector also is absorber here, because the outgoing electron wave, when it gets backscattered, when it reaches the absorbing atom, it gives the constructive or destructive interference, and from that we can infer something about the distance and other things, nature of surroundings, and type of surroundings, or number of surroundings, all these things. So according to quantum mechanical perturbation theory, because this is a interference, so we can explain this on the basis of quantum mechanics. And so this is the very famous, well-known matrix transition element, where you can see the F is the final state, I is the initial state, and HP is the interaction Hamiltonian, which causes the transition. So why the term, this is categorized as a spectroscopic technique because it involves a spectroscopic transition. So when you shine a X-ray photon, the electron is ejected out, and it is giving a photoelectron that you can imagine like a free electron wave or a plane wave. And then so if in the single monoatomic gas or a isolated atom, what happens, this outgoing wave is a non-interfering with the other absorbing atom, other backscatter atom. So it doesn't see any change in the wave function. So that's why there is a monotonic decrease in the X-ray absorption. For example, here you see. Okay. So, but as soon as we move to a state when there is a condensed matter, what happens? Now the absorbing atom, when the photoelectron wave propagates, it sees the surrounding electron cloud here, and then it gets backscattered, and then you can see it can have either this type of interference, and which gives rise to this peaks and valley and gives rise to the interference, and that's what it is known as the X-Zaps oscillations. So this is what the mechanism that why the absorption coefficient gets modulated in the material. So because of, so that means the surroundings a important factor for getting the X-Zap signal. If it is not a condensed matter, you will not get any X-Zap signal. So therefore, the X-Zaps is always feasible, not even only in solid state, it can be also feasible in any molecule, because molecule also have surrounding atoms. So it will give X-Zap signal. So with this now, I give the features which has come out of this basic mechanism. So basically, it is a spectroscopic tool which provides the structural information about the sample by the analysis of its X-ray absorption spectra. So analysis of spectra means that basically that Hamiltonian, I mean the matrix element, from there you can get information about the absorbing atom, all those things. And also it gives the information on the chemical environment, and since it involves a particular characteristic absorption age, so that's why it becomes a element specific, and it can give also structural disorders, because if there is some variations in the bond length, so that also will get reflected in the X-Zap spectrum. Another important aspect of this X-Zaps is that it is why it is called local structure. The basic mechanism behind this is because the photoelectron wave which is coming out of the absorbing atom, it decays fast, either due to core hole left time, which has almost 10 to the minus 15 seconds, or due to inelastic scattering. So you can see, for example, this is the mean free path plot versus electron kinetic energy. So you can see hardly in our X-Zaps energy not propagates more than 1000 eV from the edge. So in that region, it can see only up to around 10 angstrom or so information from the absorbing atom. So because of the mean free path limitation, photoelectron in the condensed matter gets inelastically scattered, and that's why it loses its information. And this becomes a basically positive point for this technique, and that's why it doesn't require a long range order. So, and also it can be tuned for even for low concentration or thin film kind of samples. Okay, so now I come to the basic X-Zaps function, which this trio group of Sayers, Stern, and Lytle, which is also known as the father of X-Zaps theory, he derived this equation. So he derived this basic equation of the X-Zaps equation, which is known as X-Zaps function, this chi k, and that you can see in this various parameters. So this is a sum over j, and j is basically the neighbors. I mean, j is equal to 1, 2, 3. So you can have first neighbor, second neighbor, third neighbor, like that. So you cannot, normally we don't go beyond third neighbor, beyond that, because signal is very, very poor. And this signal is, now you can see, the proportional to this nj, that means number of atoms in that particular cell, jth cell. and this is a S0 square, which is also called a amplitude reduction factor, which basically includes the experimental artifacts as well as the inelastic scattering portion, which decays, which actually is responsible for decay of the signal. Then FJK and the sigma k, these are the scattering amplitude and the phase shift parameter. And this is the mean free path parameter, that is lambda k that I showed you in this graph. So this is the lambda k, which is responsible for the attenuation of the HF signal. And this part is the Debye-Ouellard factor, which basically gives you the disorder in the system, the idea of disorder in the material. So for example, if it is a crystalline, it will be less. If it is a amorphous, it will be more. And then this part is sine function, and this consists of two components, 2krj, which is basically the phase shift due to central absorbing atom, and this part is due to back scattering atom. So basically, you can say the X-Habs is nothing but a sine wave, okay? Because this is sine function and these are the amplitude part. So, but you can see here, you don't see like sine wave, this X-Habs. The reason is because this is a plot of absorption coefficient. So this is still a spectroscopic information. Now we have to derive from this the structural information, and which is given by this function chi-e. So this is the function. So from the what we measure is the absorption coefficient versus photo energy versus absorption coefficient, and from here we derive the experimental X-Habs function value. This is derived by mu e. That means this is a function mu e by mu 0 e. Mu 0 is nothing but imagine there is no neighboring atoms. So how it will behave? It will behave like a monotonic decrease in the absorption coefficient. So we subtract that as a mu 0 part, and then you divide by the this jump in the absorption coefficient, which is called delta mu 0. So from the base to the this value, and then so that it is normalized per atom, because this jump is proportional to the number of atoms interacting with the X-ray photon. So that's why to compare the different data, we normalize the X-ray absorption spectrum. So if you normalize by this jump, that means we are divided by the total number of atoms absorbed in the system. And so that's why now this is the X-Habs function per atom. Now this X-Habs signal is a sine wave function. So that's why, so if you, in the next slide, you will see that, and now this, another part is, as this is the sum of our different cells, different neighbors. So it is a sum of different sine waves. And the sine waves, the phase part will decide what is the frequency, and this Nj will decide what is the amplitude, and Rj, sorry, yes, Nj will decide the amplitude of the sine wave function, and Rj will decide the frequency, and these two will give the how good or bad the X-Habs signal will be there. And so this chi-e is the X-Habs function as a function of photon energy, but now finally you have to get it in the terms of photoelectron wave, which I discussed in the previous slide, that as a de Broglie wave. So de Broglie wave is defined like k is equal to this 2m e minus E0 by h cross square. Here E is nothing but your incident photon energy, monochromatic beam, and which is we are scanning across the edge, and E0 is the binding energy. So this central point of the ozone is E0. So from there we get the chi-e, we get to this chi-k, and this chi-k is then experimental chi-k is used to model using this theoretical equation. So to give you some feeling about how these terms are useful later on for data analysis. So these are three terms from this I have taken up. So this is the phase shift due to the central atom, and you can see how it is sensitive if you plot the k versus the phase shift, which is in radian, this part. So you can see, for example, this is carbon. Now carbon is at the bottom. And this is expected because carbon has very less number of electrons. So it is weak scattering. And then you see the germanium, it is higher. And further, if you platinum you go, it is further higher. So that's why, depending upon the central atom, this phase shift will be changing. And now this is the amplitude. So amplitude is nothing but this NJ part, and you can see the amplitude plot versus the K, de Broglie wave vector. And you can see, for example, here again for carbon, you see the amplitude is less, and it is peaking at the lower K. So, and whereas the platinum is having more amplitude, and germanium is also having more amplitude. But of course, this is also dependent on the nearest neighbor, distance, atomic distance. So all this will come into play to give the nature of the sine wave function. And this is the phase shift of the backscattering atom. So you can see for the backscattering atom, the for carbon, the phase shift is higher. It's not like central atom, because it has traveled 2r distance. It will travel 2r distance from the central atom, because from central atom it will go to absorbing, that is 1r, and then it will come back. So it travels 2r. So it will be there will be more shift for this atom. Okay, so another thing is that sensitivity to atomic species, which I want to mention, that is sensitive for more than Z minus Z prime. If it is more than 5, it is more sensitive. Otherwise, you have to deconvolute and get the spectra. So now another part is the, so this is the one slide where I want to make your point that how the frequency on the exact signal changes with the interatomic distance, coordination number, and de Broglie factor. So for example, here you can see there are two cases. So this is a sine wave. This is sine wave, imagining there is only one wave. There is only, I'm talking of first cell, let us say. So you can see this sine wave. First of all, you can see the sine wave is decaying beyond 15 angstrom, and that is because of your de Broglie factor and mean free path. And then you can see when the atom is at 4 angstrom, so you see the frequency has changed. So that means interatomic distance is responsible for changing the frequency of the sine wave signal. And this is the amplitude, which is due to the coordination number. And so if n is 4, you can see the amplitude has gone up, and if it is less, then amplitude has gone down. And similarly for de Broglie factor, if it is 0.005, so you can see the signal is more pronounced, but if it is 0.01, it is damped. Now coming to, so the so far this was the origin of X-Jabs and various parameters of X-Jabs equation, which is finally responsible for deriving the structural parameters. Now, how to get X-Jabs data from the Wilson spectra? So that I briefly, one or two slides I'll try to describe. So basically what we measure is the, X-ray absorption coefficient across the photon energy range. So this is the graph that one get in first hand graph, and then from there we subtract the background, that is which I told you earlier, the monotonic background, this part, and then also background under below this absorption edge. Now why I call this also background? It looks a flat monotonic because before this edge, let us say I have started with germanium K. Now the photon energy, of course, will not excite germanium K before the germanium K is binding energy. But there are lower edges, L edges of germanium, M edges of germanium. So that will get absorbed. So we have to subtract this part. So after subtracting, we get the normalized spectra of the mu, And this is the just mu0 part, which is responsible for the if the atom is in isolated state. I mean, if it, let us say monatomic gas or something. So that also is a nuisance for analysis. So that also you have to filter it out. So finally, what we get this kind of X-Zaps function, the oscillation. And you can see this is not exactly like a sine wave, but a distorted sine wave. And the reason for this is because it's a mixture of different sine waves because, due to different neighboring atoms. And so, so this is, for example, the Mn FeTO3, it is only Fe case. And so when you do the Fourier transform of this X-Zaps function, so basically we get the different frequency component separated. So you can see, so if it is a single function, single sine wave function, we will get only one signal, I mean one frequency, and which will be peaked at particular atomic distance. Since it has a multiple sine waves embedded in it, so we get many peaks, and each peak is it has come because of the sine wave in this. So first one is, for example, FeO here, which is at shorter distance, 2.05 angstrom, and this is for iron, that is second nearest neighbor, and this is for the FeMn, which is at 3.5. So far, so we now understood that X-Zaps is a sine wave function. X-Zaps signal is nothing but a sine wave function. And since it is a condensed matter and there are many surroundings, so it is a mixture of sine wave function, and it is proportional to parameters like bond length and the number of neighbors, type of neighbors, all these things. And this finally gives rise to the structural parameter. So now I come to the modes of experiment. So far we have understood how to perform the X-Zaps experiment and what information we get. Now, how do you perform? First of all, for this we need a synchrotron source because we have to have a continuum source so that we can scan the energy range of 1000 eV from the absorption edge. And then we need a detector for detection of the photons. And so we need two detectors minimum at least. One is for getting the incident beam I0, and another is for the transmitted beam from the sample. So X-ray beam falls on the sample and the transmitted beam is monitored. And the attenuation in this incident beam gives rise to Josephson coefficient. And now, what are the main points which one should be responsible, one should be cautious during the measurement, before this you start the measurement? So first part is sample preparation. And as you know, if the sample is non-homogeneous or it is having some fine holes, so it will give rise to false spikes in your Josephson spectrum, and you will misinterpret the data. So that's why you should have homogeneous thickness. And because thickness is important, because the Beard-Lemaitre law is proportional to thickness, the mu. And then the grain size also is very important, because if the grain size is non-uniform, then let us say some is of 1 micron, some is of half micron. So locally in the sample, one X-ray photon will, one type of X-ray photon will get attenuated more than compared to other. And this will also give rise to the spikes in the signal. So because the X-ray attenuation of the material in this energy range is around micron, so we expect that the grain size, particle size for the sample should be not more than few microns. So that is so that means it should not be bigger than the absorption length. Then it should be free from pinhole, and of course the thickness has to be optimum. It cannot be very thick or it can be very thin, because the optimum signal is obtained for X-Zaps signal only when this mu is around 2 to 3 times above the absorption edge, or the edge step is around 1. So what I mean is this. See, for example, so this is step should not be more than one. It should be around one. So amount of atoms which will interact should be such that this jump is around one. Then you get a very good signal. Of course, so this type of transmission detection measurement mode of detection is suitable only for the concentrated samples. The reason is because if it is not concentrated sample, we will not get enough counts, enough jump in the absorption spectra. Another mode is for the fluorescence mode. For that, those cases, for example, where we don't get enough signal and your sample is very dilute. So, for example, here you see the absorption spectra is for the concentrated samples and it is compared with the dilute sample. So, red one is for 1% metal. So, you have seen there is enough jump and in the signal, whereas this is 50 ppm metal, so hardly it is visible. Okay, and so. And this is another case, the transmission is also sensitive to background absorption. So this is the case when your background is very low. But there may be case, although your absorbing atom is enough percentage, like 1% metal, but here this 1% metal is in Br2 kind of matrix. So there also the absorption signal is attenuated. So that means it is not only the concentration of the element present in the system, it is also important that the concentration is in which matrix. If it is in high Z matrix, then also the transmission will be difficult. So Br2, since being a high Z material, and you know that absorption coefficient is proportional to Z to the power 4. So that's why most of the X-ray photons which is interacting with the system, it gets eaten away by the matrix. So therefore, in these cases, either when it is dilute or it is concentrated, but it is embedded in a high Z matrix, we need to go to fluorescence mode of detection. So these are the two modes, transmission and fluorescence, which are used for hard X-ray detection. And otherwise, in soft X-ray detection, we prefer either total photoelectron yield or partial yield because we cannot get any transmission from the sample. So here how mu is calculated. Mu is basically nothing but if it is a dilute sample, it can be approximated like a ratio of fluorescence versus divided by the incident beam. So we assign the incident beam I0 at the sample, and the fluorescence signal which is coming out from the sample is detected by the fluorescence detector. So for example, if you have a germanium, so we can use germanium K alpha with the energy density detector, and that is, we plot this versus mu versus photon energy, and that gives rise to this, what do you call the absorption spectra. Okay, so we have covered now the methods of detection of the gaps. Now I'll go to actually I forgot to mention about the Jane's part. Although EXAFS we have already explained, but EXAFS is basically defined as the, if I go to first slide here, yeah. So for example here, this, so the region in this, yeah, here I can see. So for example, here you can see, so this whole EXAFS spectrum can be divided in two parts. So the region, this yellow shaded region is called Jane's, and it is called X-ray absorption near the structure. And the region beyond the 50 eV from the edge to 1000 eV, this is called extended X-ray absorption fine structure. And in the modern theory, now these two both are combined and is known as only X-ray absorption fine structure, because the modern theory can, single theory can explain both the phenomena, and EXAFS and Jane's. So I will now tell, so EXAFS, I already discussed what information we get. Now I'll tell what is the Jane's part in the slide, next slide. Okay, so basically the Jane's is a very, you can see the Jane's region of the spectrum of the EXAFS spectrum is very strong in signal, in terms of signal. And this is because of the strong absorption in the unoccupied states, because this is a purely spectroscopy region. I mean, these are all the peaks are directly assigned to particular energy level. So basically it is a quantum mechanical, yeah, you can say resonant absorption region, and that's why you see the very intense signal, whereas in EXAFS we see the scattering signal, so it is low compared to this GENS. So GENS is very handy many times to extract the structural information without going to deeper analysis route of EXAFS. And this GENS directly gives information about the oxidation state. And the GENS basically you can further split in many components, like it is having three components, the pre-edge. So that means before the main edge, rising edge starts, we can get some pre-edge features that we'll see later on. What does these significance it has, and then the edge, the main edge, which is the transition from the core cell, like K cell to 1s to 2p kind of transition, and then this is the GENS region, which is either due to transition to unoccupied density of states, or I mean that means conduction band in case of metal or semiconductor. So, or it can be also due to the multiple scattering component. I mean, the photoelectron, since the kinetic energy is very less here in the near the absorption edge, so it can have multiple scattering. So all this contribution is there in this figure. Okay, so I have taken one example now to prove the point that how it is sensitive for oxidation state. So this is the plot of the manganese K edge absorption spectra, and basically it is GENS region. And you can see this is the manganese foil, and along with that we have this manganese 5+ compound, then we have a manganese 4+ compound, and we have a manganese 3+ and manganese 2+. So from 0 to 5 we have the oxidation state of the manganese, and that you can see very clearly there's a shift in the absorption edges. So this is 0, and so that means as soon as the oxidation state is increased, there is a chemical shift. The edges get shifted towards higher energy position. So, and this, if you take the derivative of each spectra and take the peak of the derivative, and that is plotted here. So, and this is basically signifies the valence state in the of the manganese atom in that material. So you can see the plot of the manganese K versus the valency. So the minimum is the manganese metal 0 state, and then it's 2, 3, 4, 5. So there is a clear-cut linear fit. So you can predict. So suppose if your unknown sample is somewhere, if your known sample, let us say I have +5 and +2, and your unknown sample somewhere it fits somewhere in this region, so you can predict that it is in +3 or +4. So basically this can be used as a fingerprint of your analysis of the oxidation state. Now this is the example where you can know the local coordination environment without going to EXAFS detailed analysis. So for example, here the idea is to get, see here, for example, this is barium titanate, and both in both the cases, the oxidation formal state is same. Okay, it is in, but what is the difference? The difference is in one case it is tetrahedral and this is in octahedral. And now this nearest local coordination environment very sensitive to the pre-edge region. So the first I showed you first example, that was shift in this edge. Now this is a sensitivity in the pre-edge region. Now in this case, what is plotted here is a titanium absorption spectra. This is the titanium edge, and this is the absorption coefficient. And then you can see there is a blue curve which represents the barium titanate Ba2Ti4, and it is in 4+ state. Here also it is in 4+ state. So, and but there is a difference in the pre-edge. So you can see in the blue there is an intense rise in the pre-edge features, and which is due to 1s 3D transition. Now we'll say that 1s 3D is not allowed as per selection rule because it is delta L becomes more than 1. But here, because of the distorted, because of the tetrahedral nature in this environment, there is a PD hybridization. I mean, the p orbital of the titanium, of the oxygen, and d orbital of the titanium gets hybridized, and that's why there is a increase in the p character of the 3D orbital, and therefore there is a increase in the pH. And from there itself, by looking at the spectra, you can say this is tetrahedral, this is tetrahedral, and this is octahedral. Whereas in this case, since there is no hybridization, so there is some intensity, but it is very weak because 1s to 3D, it is dipole forbidden. Only it is quadrupole allowed. Okay. So in that case, the intensity, that's why very weak. So by looking at this pH, we can say the geometry of the local geometry of the titanium atom. So this is another example of the oxidation state, and here you can see that due to different oxidation state in the of the copper, there is a shift in the spectra, and from this spectra, we can also, by fitting, we can also find out the percentage composition of different valence state. So because only thing that we need the standards. For example, if you have a standards of +1, +2, +3, and then I have to know in your unknown compound what is the percentage of +1 or +2. So by linear fitting of this spectra, we can infer the composition of the different valence state. So let us conclude now on the gens part. So gens can be described qualitatively and nearly quantitatively. Because why nearly quantitatively? Because we can say very clearly about the oxidation state and about the percentage of oxidation state, and we can get information on coordination chemistry, whether it is regular or it is distorted or it is a tetrahedral. Then also we can say whether there is a PD mixing. For example, we saw in the case of barium titanate, there was a PD orbital hybridization. So crystal field theory can be somewhat explained. And also band structure, because the density of available electronic states, as I told you, this feature is responsible for the density of unoccupied states beyond the just above the edge. So if it is less intense or more intense, so you can say whether the density of states is less or more. And also it has a component of multiple scattering. So by theoretical simulation, we can also find out the exact kind of information like bond angle and bond distance. Okay, so finally, so for this last part, multiple scattering, we need this theory, which is a modern theory, but which is available online free of cost. So you can use for analysis. So this again tabulated the gens part. So we have 3 components. So pH gives you the local coordination environment around the absorbing atom and dependence of the oxidation state. And this H gives chemical shift, and this gives the atomic positions of neighbors, gens part. Okay, now I come to EXAFS facility at Indus 2. So we have 2 beam lines set up for a comprehensive EXAFS experiment, which can be done on a variety of samples. If it can be done anywhere in the world, that can be done here also, using these 2 beam lines. And these 2 beam lines are based on 2 optical geometry. One is based on energy dispersive geometry, and one is based on energy scanning. And this is the latest edition in 2013. It was commissioned. So this is the view graph view of that energy dispersive EXAFS beam line. This is the experimental station, and this is the detector, CCD detector for EXAFS detection. And this is the optical layout. So you can see this is the source, synchronous source, then a concrete wall, then we have a beam aperture system, then we have pre-mirror for the collimation, and then we have a single crystal silicon 1 muon, And this is a bent crystal. It is called polychromator instead of monochromator. The reason is because we want to have a polychromatic beam so that simultaneously we can record the whole edge spectrum instead of scanning. And this is done by bending this crystal. So once you bend the crystal, we have a range of Bragg angle basically available along this length, and that's why it gives rise to a range of energies focused at the sample position. And this sample further diverges after the transmission, and then we detect this by a position sensitive detector. And so whole spectra is recorded in a few hundred milliseconds. So this beamline was basically designed with the objective to record in situ studies, for example, kinetic studies or for phase transition studies with temperature or pressure like that. So this is the experimental station. So you can see this is the single crystal, the polychromator, and this selects the polychromatic beam, and this is the input port or synchrotron, and the sample stage, and this is the detector. Position sensitive detector, this is a CCD type. So this is the second beamline, which is based on energy scanning. And in the earlier version, that is energy scanning type, this has certain limitations. Since it is a polychromatic beam falling on this sample, so we don't have information available for the I0 part, which is responsible for scanning type of geometry. And here you cannot do any fluorescence kind of studies. You can do only transmission mode. So this is suitable mostly for the concentrated samples and for the time-dependent studies, for example, in the phase transition. So to overcome this limitation, we developed this beamline, which is on energy scanning. So here you can see this is the monochromator chamber that is called double crystal monochromator, and these are the other mirror optical components, and this is the experimental station in the hatch. And you can see everything is in air, unlike the UV or soft X-ray counterpart experimental station where vacuum environment is required. Here you can perform the experiment in air because the hard X-ray hardly gets attenuated by air. So this is the first ionization chamber, the detector, which detects the incident beam. This is the second ionization chamber for the detection of the transmitted intensity from the sample. And this is the third, which is also required for referencing. Suppose you have to calibrate your photon energy. So we put some reference sample in between here, and from this it is used to calibrate the energy graph. And this is the fluorescence detector. If the sample is dilute, so we place the detector at 90 degrees to the incident beam and to record the fluorescence signal. And this at the station we have a CCR for sample environment to go down to 10 K, and we have a high temperature cell which can go up to 1000 K. So anyway, this is the optical I have already described. So first, from the this is a source from the bending magnet from Indus 2, and the first element is the mirror, then a slit, and then this double crystal system, which is called DCM, which gives a monochromatic beam, and further there is a vertical focusing mirror which focuses the beam at the sample. And these are the two detectors, the fluorescence detector. And the experiment from the source, distance from the source point to experiment is around 37 meters, where the experiment is performed. So the beam line up to this portion it is in ultra high vacuum in -9 millibar, and so that the storage ring is protected. Okay, so what can be done with this beam line? So this is the periodic table, and then you can see the green part, which is the K edges. So all the K edges of transition elements, most of the transition elements can be performed at this beam line. And beyond that, which is not accessible K edges, then you can do the L3 edges. So for example, these rare earth and hydrogen elements, we can choose the L3 edges, for example, lanthanum to uranium. So the beamline range is such that so you can perform in the energy range of 5 to 30 kV. So start from titanium to uranium LHS. And these are the facilities available at the Indus gas beamline. So we have a low temperature and high temperature. I told you. Then recently we have done the feasibility studies for a 2 Tesla magnet for XAS in magnetic field at room temperature. And measurement is possible in transmission and fluorescence mode. Dilute samples, so we can do the protein samples also, or drug samples can be done with a high sensitive detector. And measurement is also possible on thin films. Suppose you want to do surface exams, that can be done. Then also we have added the facility for in situ studies. Suppose we have a reaction cell and you want to study how the reaction proceeds with the incident UV visible light, then battery and heterogeneous catalysis. So these are the photographs of the various facilities. So this is the intermediate high temperature cell, which is suitable for transmission mode of measurement. This is a 1000K, and this is the CCR based cryostat, and this is the arrangement with the 2 Tesla magnet. This is a 2 Tesla magnet to see the facility for X-ray magnetic circular dichroism, which I have not covered in this, but that is also very novel technique which has come up due to synchronization source. And this is the 2-axis goniometer with 5-axis sample stage for gauging incidence exams. So we can do this here, the thin film exams. And these are the facilities for in situ X-ray dose and measurement on catalysis and photocatalysis reactions. So this you can do for heterogeneous. This is the mixture of gases that can be provided for heterogeneous catalysis, and this is the reaction cell. And this is a gas chromatograph which is also attached with this reaction cell, so you can simultaneously monitor the reaction products by gas chromatography. At the same time, you can monitor the structural evolution in the reaction cell. And this is the photocatalysis reaction cell. So this is the reaction cell for photocatalyst, and this is the UV visible source which is mimicking the sunlight. And then we have a gas outlet for monitoring the reaction products, and this is the cell. So you can see there is a provision for X-ray beam, and there is a provision for the output beam. And this is the for reaction cell for monitoring the growth, structural growth of nanoparticle. This is the basically kind of precursor plus capping agent, and this is the syringe pump, and the reaction is instantaneously started, and then we sign the visible source and monitor the exact signal with the CCD based detector. And this is the arrangement for structural studies on the lithium-ion battery type of studies. Because this, okay. So based on these facilities, various type of material studies can be performed, which give rise to, which gives information on the local structure in non-crystalline matter, local environment, and a study of systems whose local properties differ from the average properties. So many times you will find XRD doesn't show any changes in the samples, although some physical properties like magnetic properties is giving some change. So in that case, this XAPS can be very handy tool, and it can also detect very small distortions of local structure. For example, there is some slight tilt in the, let us say, octahedral angle or something, so that can be seen. So these are some type of materials, broad category of materials which has been studied using these beamlines. So starting from nuclear materials, waste management, luminescence, nanomaterials, then dielectric magnetic semiconductor, and many Ayurvedic drugs, then biological samples, and also in situ studies has been done on the growth of gold and platinum nanoparticles on lithium-ion battery, then catalyst systems, and also grazing incidence exams, which has been added recent facility. So both dependent, depth-dependent exam studies can be done, and some industrial application also. So for industries, we charge very nominal amount, around 7,500 per hour beam time for their use, because they don't disclose their research. So that's why we charge. If they disclose if it is the open domain, then we don't charge. So now I come to the application part. So this is the example where I try to show that how the polarization of the synchronous source. Sorry, not this. So this is the example on somehow this title is masked by this. How can I remove this title? Okay. So this is the I wanted to, on the top, there is a one screen is coming, which is masking the title of the slide. Okay, so this is the example on the double perovskite of sample GD2 CORU06 samples, and this was studied by X-ray spectroscopy and magnetic measurements. And this is the graph you can see of with the experimental as well as fitted curves. So this is the for this compound, and various scattering path is given. So for example, this is RUC, RU, and RUGD2, RUGD1, RU. And all these are, some of all these are there in the EXAFS signal. So that's what it is proved that the model is correct. And because if you subtract the spectra, the residual is almost flat, and it is within the background level. And this is the Fourier transform of this spectra, and which gives the bond length of the in the compound. So there are two types of compounds here, GD2 CORU06. And what is the change in the in this compound? There is one is slow cooled sample, which shows basically uniform disorder, whereas the cooled one shows the islands of disorder. And Jen's measurements show the mixed valences for both RU and CO. So this was again done by recording the different standards for RU and CO of different oxidation states, and from there we got the percentage composition. Now the third outcome, the difference in the disorder in the two samples which was observed, which nicely account for the differences in their magnetic properties. So this is the example when the overall long range order doesn't say much about that why the magnetic properties there is a difference. So when we probe this local structure, then we found that the magnetic properties gets explained. This is the doping of the cobalt doped nickel oxide core cell structure. So the cobalt and graphene oxide is co-doped on a nickel oxide core cell structure, and this was studied with the X-ray absorption spectroscopy and GENS, EXAFS and GENS, and the coordinates of all the atoms were found to vary on the doping. So, for example, this is a spectra of the red one is 3%, and the 5% is the black one, and there is a difference in the spectra, which is very clearly seen, especially in the GENS region. There is a split in the peak, whereas there is an enhancement in the peak here, and this gives a clue that there is a large, more unoccupied density of states in the 5% doping. And this is the radial distribution function plot extracted from the EXAFS signal, and you can see one thing that this confirms that cobalt is present in the metallic form in this core cell structure. See, we have recorded the cobalt metal as well cobalt oxide, and you can see the cobalt oxide is at the lower bond distance, which is, sorry, I told reverse. Actually, cobalt oxide is present, the cobalt is present in +2 states, which is also confirmed by this EXAFS. So you can see that this compound in 3% and 4%, 5% is matching with the CO metal bond, CO metal bond. So it is not getting oxidized. So measurements indicate that cobalt doping and GO incorporation suppresses the AFM charge ordering and lead to spin flop metamagnetic behavior between 5 to 300 K. So this was the finding from the magnetic measurement, and which has been corroborated by Exhabs and Jens. Now this is the measurement example, which is based on the polarization properties of the synchrotron source we have used. And so you can see we have used the two geometry of measurement. In one case, the sample is flat, and as you know, the like synchrotron light is linearly polarized. So in one case, we'll have the electric vector parallel to the bond, and in case it will be perpendicular to the bond, and that will give that may give a modification in the signal. So this is the Exhabs oscillations plotted for gallium phosphide wafer, and other two are for in plane and out of plane, and this is the radial distribution function for these samples. And what we get, that is gallium phosphide layers on germanium 111 are structural coherent, but they show the presence of residual strain, which is attributed to the diffusion of G. So this was the model, or this is the expectation, and it was confirmed by SIMS, secondary ion mass spectrometry. And then we did the gallium KH Exhabs, which reveals there is a asymmetric variation of the in plane and out of plane direction. So if it would have been not asymmetric, that means it shows the gallium bond length is not isotropic. And that gives probably reason for the diffusion and bonding. So local variation in gallium interatomic distance explain the macroscopic residual tensile strain. So based on this, now we calculated the tensile strain based on the asymmetric bond distance available information obtained from the Exhabs measurement. And this was published recently in Journal of Synchrotron Radiation journal. Okay, so this is an example on the Ayurvedic drug. As you know, we Indians have always very bad habit of telling that all mercury, bhasma, and all those things are toxic, you should not consume. And our Rishi Muni, or that time of our scientists, they whatever they have developed, we are trying to now validate with the scientific techniques. And here is one example of the Rasa Sindhura, which is a Ayurvedic drug, and it was prepared by both methods, modern methods, the chemical modern methods, and also by traditional Ayurvedic drugs, traditional methods of Ayurvedic drug preparation, which is given in our literature, old literature, which is based on organic way, like from the Bargad leaves and all that. Okay, so to validate this for non-toxicity, so Rasa Sindhura is nothing but it is a mercury sulfide. So what we have to objective was no organic chemical form of mercury before entering the human body, and then complete oxidation of mercury, there is no trace of mercury is present in the medicine, because we know mercury in 0 state is only toxic, not in +2. So this is second objective we wanted to fulfill from this measurement. And third is the integrated structure of the medicine, so that compound form is retained inside the body. I mean, it should not be so, it should be very rugged when it goes to inside the body. So it should not get reduced after going to the body in metallic form. So all these threefold objectives were achieved by measurement, and this is the measurement on Rasa Sindhura along with some standards, which is red HGS. So it is a counterpart of Rasa Sindhura, but prepared through laboratory method. And this is the other phases of HGS, and these are the simulated one. And you can see the black one is our Rasa Sindhura, and it is definitely different from the beta HGS, which is at a slightly higher bond distance. Okay, so that comes from that is present in alpha HGS kind of state, and it is also slightly different from the lab-based red HGS. Okay, and this is the plot of the gens part. I mean, we have plotted the L3 edge gens in this graph, the derivative of the gens spectra to confirm the oxidation state of the mercury present in the medition. So this you can see the inset. This is the gens spectrum of the Rasasindhura, the drug, along with the various standards, and then this has been first derivative has been taken and this has been plotted. And you see the A is for the alpha HGS, and the black one, the A, which is matching with the alpha HGS as well as the Rasasindhura, and which is in the +2 oxidation state. So this confirms that Rasasindhura has no trace of Hg0. And this is further confirmed because you can see the Hg0 has the peak at C. So there is no trace even in this spectra of the black one. So that also further confirms that and we have done also the linear combination fitting so that whether any small component is present. So that also has been confirmed, and it shows that it contains only Hg+2. So that proves that it is a non-toxic. And the second other part, we proved that it is a form of non-toxic alpha HGS, and there is no trace of elementum mercury and organo HGS. Second is that nanocrystal is a defect-free. The crystal which was prepared by this method is a defect-free and is ordered configuration, which has been confirmed by X-Japs oscillations by de Broglie factor. And so therefore, which ensures the integrity during the drug release. So apart from this, this synthesis also, Ayurvedic synthesis yielded a better controlled and end product than lab-based red HGS. So basically it is, you can say at the most, it is at par with the modern synthesis technique. So this results are have been published in Journal of Cycloradiation in 2015. So this is another example on the finding the local structure of the various you can say structural structure of the iron oxide. Basically, iron oxide can have a variety of phases, like hematite, megamite, then magnetite, and goethite. So this is the nanoparticle. Objective was to prepare a nanoparticle in a hematite form, which has a very potential for water oxidation reaction. So iron oxide at nanoscale exhibit a photocatalytic reactivity. So to ascertain this, we did this X-Japs, and so that we can say that unambiguously that it is present in hematite. So what we did, we took all the 3-4 standards and simulated the spectra for all the 3-4 standards, and of which all are present in +3. And then this is the plot of the experimental data versus the alpha F2O3, and then you can see it is very well fitted, and radial distribution function is well fitted to experimental data. So that's how it confirmed that in alpha form, and same fitting has been shown in the X-Japs function. So there also, so basically is re-emphasizing that our fitting is good, and this is also confirmed by the R factor, which is quite less. So this is a measure of how goodness is fit. And this could not be ascertained by normal XRD technique, because this is a XRD pattern, which is a very broad feature only comes because it is a nanomaterial. So it could not give any clue. So here X-Japs becomes a handy tool to prove that it is the hematite structure. And the oxidation state was proved by the James plot, and then from we took the plot the derivative spectra, and from there we could say that it is in +3 state and not in mixed state. Okay, so this is another example of local structural determination in the structural environment around gallium 3+ in gallium oxyhydroxide nanorods due to europium ions doping. So how with europium ions doping the phase changes, and that is the motif here. So already some complementary techniques has revealed that there is a formation of mixed gallium 3+ and U3+ hydroxides. So now wanted to further confirm whether the local short range order around gallium with the change in the hydroxide linkage in gallium oxyhydroxide lattice. So this is the CAPS spectra, and which shows that local state is unaffected, but there is a with increased disorder in the system. So although bond distance and etc. are same, so this gave a clue that there is some kind of breaking of the, compound is getting dissociated, and which is further confirmed by Raman and Iyer. So gallium and europium ions, since europium ion is having high bond ionic radii, so this is expected that at higher concentrated doping, there may be phase precipitation. So that's why at certain doping, what we have found that there is a finally mixed phase of gallium oxyhydroxide as well as UOH3 phases, which has been confirmed by fitting the spectra or experimental spectra with the Agios function. So this is an example on the in situ studies of the, so here we see the structural growth during the formation of novel metallic nanoparticles. So you can see this is a plot of photoenergy versus the mu, and these are the series of spectra with time. So starting from 0 second and to 500 second, where all the reactions is over. So this is the geometry. So we sign the X-ray photon from here, and this is the position sensitivity detector, and this is the CCD-based spectrophotometer for recording the visible small angle visible scattering spectra. So you can see here the plot of time radial distribution function from here we have converted to a radial distribution function of this Agios function, Agios spectra, and it is plotted again versus time, and at time is 2 is equal to 0, which is you see the black one. Okay, so this is happening in situ. It is not that reaction is carried out separately and then brought to the synchronous addition. So in this reaction cell, the reaction is going on, and with time we are monitoring the structural growth. And you can see at the 0 time, this bond distance is corresponding to AUCL. So the starting reaction was AUCL. So that's why we see AUCL. And even after 4 seconds, although there is some reduction in the overall peak intensity, but predominantly it is AUCL. And after 10 seconds, there is a drastic reduction in the intensity, and almost at, you can say that this is 50 seconds. So 50 seconds, also there is a drastic distance, and there is some evolution now started of AAU bond length, which is so this is the AU pure platinum foil spectra. So this is the signature of AAU bond. So you can see around 500 millisecond for this spectra, for example, everything is converted almost into AU. So that means AUCL bond has broken and it has again got converted to AU. So this is how we can monitor the nanoparticle crystal growth, nanoparticle growth of the novel metals. For example, here it is gold. You can choose platinum or whatever you want. And this is the plot of the coordination number. So this also gives a clue. So for example, this is a platinum Cl coordination number. Okay. So at time t is equal to 0, it is the maximum, and then time elapses, you see gradual decrease in the coordination number. So, and then it has become flat after the reaction is over. And here it is the coordination number of AU and AUPT. So for example, this is AU bond. So initially till around 40 seconds, we don't see any change in the AUPT AU coordination number, and then slowly increases, and then at 300 seconds, almost it reaches a plateau maximum. So it is beautiful demonstration of the structural evolution in situ. And this is another example of heterogeneous catalysis reaction, which is also done in situ. And here the objective is to see why the activity of cobalt-based catalyst deteriorates after certain cycling. So the material is CO3O4 nanoparticle, and and in this case we have monitored at different temperature from 240 to 320, and during this temperature range we have also monitored the evolution of the gases coming out from this reaction, H2, CO, N2, by using a gas chromatography. So simultaneously, we can monitor the evolution of the structure as well as the reaction products by using the gas chromatograph, which is shown here in this spectra. And these are the reactants gases mixture which are fed into reaction cell, and this is the reaction cell which sits here, and these are two detectors, incident and outgoing for beam. And so basically objective is the structural and activity correlation, that why activity of catalyst goes down after certain cycling or certain temperature. So this is done in this experiment, and this has been published in Journal Synchrotron Radiation in 2019. And so you can see here the in situ exact spectra recorded at different temperature during reduction of the catalyst. So this is the room temperature, the black one, and then as you go increase the temperature, there is a decrease in the intensity of the amplitude. So this corresponds to your CO bond length, and this corresponds to your CO. This is COO bond length, and this is called CO bond length. So, and this is the zoomed version for this plot of EXAFS signal. And this is the in situ EXAFS signal of the sample at 400 degrees centigrade at different time interval. So once we have fixed the temperature, and then with the growth, with the time elapsed, we have plotted. So you can see here, for example, the methane peak gets the reaction temperature at 320. The methane peaks gets diminished with time, and then CO peaks increases. So from there, the variation in CH4 and CO using gas chromatography data gives a clue that there is a formation of carbon cobalt oxide phase, which was earlier thought of that there is a oxide formation. So this was ruled out by Jaynes and EXAFS and gas chromatography data. And another point was that carbon formation on the surface of the catalyst has been confirmed by Executive Raman, and the deactivation starts at 320 degree based on the gas measurement, and there is no structural change during course of variation reaction and remains the metallic phase. So if there would have been there was a conjecture that because activity is going down because there is a oxide formation. So if there is oxide formation, you would have seen as the temperature goes up, you would have seen the evolution of the CO bond length, this bond length, which is not coming in this. For example, this is 400 degrees centigrade plot of the spectra, and see all along the time, it is fixed at CO metal, which is around 3. Yeah. So So as prepared catalyst first reduces to COO and finally gets a metallic cobalt phase at 400 degrees centigrade. So that is the finding of this heterogeneous catalysis reaction. This is another example on the photo catalyst experiment. So this was the photocatalytic reduction of CO2 done on this beamline, and this was the copper based, and in this case CO2 gas was inserted in the cell, and catalyst was elected to the visible light, and the product gas was monitored using gas chromatograph. I think now almost I'm coming close to the end of my talk, so I'll not go now further. These are other examples on the how it is for gas sensor cell application. It's another on nuclear material. So maybe I will stop here. And this is on another catalyst based example. Okay, so I think I leave you with this.
Yes, Dr. Jha.
So I must thank you all for patient hearing. And at the end, yesterday I forgot to mention my all collaborators. So, so for both today's and yesterday's talk, and as you know, this is a big facility and it is not a one-man show. So it's a big team of people from not only from our department, from other department, and of course, all the users of this facility who have contributed in the evaluation of the facility, because they demanded certain things, certain facility, and based on that, we have developed the new facilities, and that's how through the years, large number of facilities have been developed at the beamline. So thank you once again.
Dr. Jha, can I make a request?
Yeah.
Can we take a few questions if you have?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Digvijay is one of the participants who has some question. Digvijay, are you there? Yes, so I am making you the co-host. Okay. Yes, Digvijay, unmute yourself.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for this nice talk, sir. Sir, I have few questions. First, regarding coordination number and distortion factor. So if we put the coordination number fixed and there is a variation in the distortion factor, then what it concludes, sir?
No, so again, this you are telling a specific example. This cannot be generally true. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
If you fix the coordination number, that means you are not allowing any defects. Let us say there is some system where there is an oxygen vacancy. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So naturally, we expect that there will be some reduction in coordination number, right?
Right, sir.
Correct. So
Correct.
not only this will also have a secondary effect on your Debye-Loyd factor also. So that means Debye-Loyd factor also will give a clue that okay, if Debye-Loyd factor is also increasing, so then both these two are basically correlated. See the number of coordination number and the Debye-Loyd factor. So if it cannot be, it cannot happen in isolation. Understood? So you have to consider both. So you cannot fix in this case. If you expect in your system that we expect some disorder, so maybe it will start with we fix it, and so that you get some reasonable fitting, not good fitting, but some reasonable, and then you maybe very manually, and then so that you arrive at a better fitting. And see, always with the exhaust fitting, there is a one issue that one should be careful that many times you can fit anything. Okay, anything means it may be unreasonable parameter.
Yes, sir.
But it will visually it will look like the fitting is very good. So we have to see the real values. Like for example, we cannot expect bond distance as unreasonable, or you cannot expect number of neighbors unreasonable. So for example, you know in advance for cubic or octahedral structure what kind of convexity. Okay. Similarly, we cannot expect unreasonable Debye-Loyd factor. Suppose we get 1 Debye-Loyd factor, or you get -1 or something, 0. So that means there is something wrong with our assumption or our modeling. So like that, you have to play with the prior knowledge of the sample or the prior information obtained from the complementary technique, like for IR. See, IR
Yes, sir.
also gives a complementary information, bond length, okay?
Mhm.
Or Raman. Raman also
Yes, sir.
gives a clue for local structure, that
Local
is
structure.
which. So
Yes,
all
sir.
this information back of the mind we have, so to conform to the real picture in your system.
Sir, in the case of double perovskite system, like something A to B, B prime O6, the coordination number is somehow fixed, and we probe with the XS, and the state of the MN and the state of the CU is fixed. But there is a variation in the distortion factor. So it indicates that there is a variation in coordination number also, or it is okay, sir?
So that may be kind of maybe due to de Broglie factor then. Because the average bond distance what you are getting is fixed. So somewhere it should lead, and then there is a only possibility with the de Broglie factor there you can account for. Because if bond length variation, distortion is so less, which is not getting resolved properly in your fitting. That means it is not distinguished. So de Broglie factor is an error sensitive parameter. It can reflect in that case.
Okay. Sir, one more thing. Sir, what intensity variation indicates? Is it indicating the distortion or distortion in the crystal structure?
So intensity variation means it is amplitude, right? So yes, amplitude is finally because of your number of neighbors and type of order. For example, if you go from amorphous, yes, normally you will expect less intense peak compared to a ordered system.
Yes, sir.
So that is one thing. Another thing is the number of neighbors if it has reduced. So then also, for example, in some of the examples I was showing with the temperature, the intensity is going down. So
yes,
for example, in AuCl bond amplitude, it was going down with the time.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir. Yes,
AuCl bond was breaking and converting to AuAu. So AuAu peak was going stronger. AuCl peak was going down. So that is directly reflecting the, that one, number of neighbors, but at the same time, it also says some about the de Broglie factor because disorder in the system. So that's why I told you amorphous and like that.
And so in the case of normal oxides, like normal perovskite LaMnO3, in that case, if La intensity is going to be decreased, then it indicates that there is a change in the coordination state, or simply change in the, or simply it indicates the variation in the structural parameters or distortion factor.
Yeah, distortion factor also could be there because, for example, John Taylor distortion, yes, that can be also, can get clue from your genes. Such type of distortion, you can get clue from genes also, from the white line intensity or from the PS.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Reason you can confirm. For example, I gave you example of titanium, barium titanate and all.
Yes, sir.
So there you can see very clearly. So in this John Taylor kind of distortion can be also seen because the hybridization will change, okay, because of John Taylor distortion. So manganese, you will see the change in the pre-age intensity.
Yes, sir.
So that will corroborate your EXAFS part.
Okay.
So many times you have to use both the tools, GENS and EXAFS.
EXAFS, yes, sir. If anyone have any question, then ask. Otherwise, I have one or two more questions.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Okay.